GingerGM.
Hello and welcome to some more game analysis of, well, some lower rated players, but I think that can generally help a lot of you out there with me, a Grandmaster, giving tips on how these two players we're going to look at here may have improved during their game. This is a game taken from the London Summer League, and I've had some very interesting games so far from this league, and this is the game of the week picked by most of the people in the chat on my YouTube channel. And the two players, we've got Adam Cranston with white, who plays a London system, and Colin Hughes with black. And you can see from the grades that Colin outgrades Adam by quite a fair bit. Now, the equivalent ELO of these, I'm not 100% sure, but I guess 160 is 1800, maybe something like that. That's a very rough guess, and I could be well off, but hey ho. So let's go into this game. I'm going to give my thoughts on where both players went wrong and how they may improve. And also, I think it's, being a higher rated player, I can pick out the main faults with lower rated players quite quickly and give them tips to improve, and maybe you at home will relate to some of the issues that these players may have had in this game. But all in all, very interesting game, and it was very enjoyable to look at this game. So let's dive in. Well, d4 was how Adam started, and now d5, and now my suggestion to play in the London system, bishop to f4. And this is becoming, well, it's been popular for a while now, and you've probably seen me use it in a number of blitz games myself. Now black played a move which is much more common, it seems, at a lower rating rather than a higher rating. It is still played at a higher rating, but I've never encountered it yet, even in a blitz game. And that is the symmetrical variation bishop to f5. And I've done a video on this. If you go to my YouTube channel and you go to the thread on openings and the London system latest developments, I have a look at what you should do against this. But I have to admit, it's something I didn't look at in enough depth in my DVD for chess base, even though I covered, I think, pretty much everything else. So what should you do against this? Well, e3 it is entirely correct to try to get the bishop out on f1, and now black is sort of, I should say, well, he should play e6. There's not really many other moves he can benefit from playing there. And now there's two ways of playing. Now the simplest way to play this, and the way that Magnus Carlsen chose against Fabiano Caruana, is bishop to d3. When you have a symmetrical position, you can use that extra tempo to, at some point, make a change in the structure to your benefit. And this is a very simple way to play, and I think I'd be very tempted to play in this manner. And the point is, well, black can't really follow the symmetrical nature, because now white can certainly change the formation to his benefit, maybe taking on f5, and then simply something like taking on d6, when the pawn here could prove to be a little bit of a weakness, maybe with c4 coming later on, when the pawn on e6 would want to be, well, the pawn on f5 would want to be back on e6 defending that one. So bishop to d3 is what Magnus played. Fabiano took on d3. Even here, pawn takes d3 is very interesting, but Magnus played the simple queen to d3. And again, we see now why symmetrical positions basically are always going to be a bit better for the person with a tempo, because here queen to b5 is an annoying move for black to deal with. It's a threat lingering there, and after black stops that threat with something like c6, white can play a move such as knight to f3, and already white has three pieces developed, and this must be slightly better for white. Not massively better by any means, because it's a very symmetrical pawn structure, but white has the better development, so therefore can claim an advantage. Maybe if I was white here, I'd be pushing to play e4 quickly, because I'd want to make a structural change as well to give me, a more distinct edge or more chances of winning this position, try to get out of the symmetrical pawn structure stage. Now, c4 is the other way you can play here. This is also a main move, but it's a bit more complex. Now, I do look at in the other video what happens if black takes on b1, and now you have to be careful of the check on b4, but I think you can play queen takes, and after the check go king d1. And you can already see why this is a bit more dangerous of white, because you've moved your king. But what you're trying to do here is play bishop to d3 and king to e2 and knight to f3. And then you'll have the advantage of the two bishops. So this is a way to really try and play for an advantage, and it's a tempting way to play. In the end, black decided not to do this and played knight to f6 instead. Now, this is maybe a critical position which I haven't looked at before. If you want to play the London system and you want to play in this way with c4, I only really looked at bishop b4. Now, really, white should be better here because we've got the c4 move in. But what should you do next? In the game, white played queen b3 straight away. Now, this would have been my first choice, but in actual fact, I think it may be not the right plan. Slightly dubious, actually. And I've only just found this out by analysing this game, and we'll come back to that in a second. But let me just show you what I think you should play. Well, really, I mean, queen b3 is the right idea, because what you're trying to do is prove that the bishop on f5 is misplaced, because it needs to be on c8 defending b7. So queen b3 is a very important part of your plan as white. But I think it's more important to first get developed and then come up with queen b3 later on. So, for example, my choice of move here would be knight to c3. I think I want to develop this way first because I want to have the possibility of rook c1 in a number of options. And queen b3 is now looking a bit stronger, and I'll demonstrate why in a second. Now, after knight c3, what should black be doing? Black is far too slow to be playing a move like c5 here. This to me looks much too weakening, and we can probably open things up now to our benefit. Something like taking on d5, give a check here, and this looks very risky to black. But there is one trick that white needs to avoid here, which is bishop b4, and this is the most active move. I mean, if black plays anything else, like bishop e7, I would probably just go knight f3, castles, and now because I've got a bit more development, I would consider queen b3, but maybe bishop e2 first, castles, and then my middle game plan is this very important move, queen b3. And we can see the advantage that white has here. This pawn on c4 allows the queen to come out and attack this one. This is my general plan against slow play. Now, if black plays bishop b4, well, I think we have to be a bit careful here. I would now recommend we challenge that bishop straight away of a3. When after the exchange on c3, white has a much more pleasant pawn structure, because these two pawns here, it's nice to have pawns in the centre in this position. And potentially later on, I want to swap off the light square bishops by playing a move such as bishop to d3 and go rook b1. And I prefer white here, because even though I've got these double pawns, I can always get rid of the double pawns by capturing on d5, and then I'll have an extra pawn in the centre. But the trap I just want to point out to you after bishop b4 is that if you continue now with a normal developing move, knight f3, knight to e4 is a bit annoying here. You'd want to defend this with rook c1, but it's actually a big mistake, and this is the trap I want you to remember, because now black can win exchange by going knight takes c3. Now, when we take towards the centre in this position, bishop to a3 comes, and we're going to lose the exchange. Our rook is trapped. Rook a1, and now this sneaky little move, bishop coming here in a number of lines. Well, this is something worth thinking about. It doesn't actually work here, because if bishop a3 in this position, again, I'm throwing this little trap in because you've got to think uniquely in every position. It's actually white who's winning now. Why is that? Little trap. I hope you saw that in time. Well, of course, queen a4 check. But it's the idea, the concept. which is much more important. So as long as you have these ideas which you're thinking of, you need to be well aware. So rook c1 is maybe okay here, but after castles, for example, what are we going to do now? Because, of course, now the trap is knight takes here and bishop to a3. And I still think, this is a slight error for white because it's very hard for white to deal with this. Bishop e2, and now the trap occurs. Take on c3, bishop to a3, and there's no longer a check on a4. So just some little subtleties in the opening, which I've noted, which I think are very important. But let's jump back to the main game. I'm spending a lot of time on the opening, but I think it's important because a lot of people watching this will be, London system practitioners after watching my videos, and I want to give you as much as a clue to the opening as I can. Well, Queen b3 was played, and now Black played a mistake. Now, the one thing I think which Colin did in this game, which he could have improved on in future, was he didn't play as actively as possible. He played some very nice positional ideas. He seems to understand maneuvers and good positional ideas very well, but maybe he plays a little bit too passively at some stage, and this is shown with moves such as Queen to c8 here. Queen to c8 is an admission of defeat. The queen is badly placed here. And now Queen b3 is certainly given white an advantage because white has this extra pressure against d5, and later on the queen is going to be misplaced on c8. So I don't like Queen c8. Black should be looking for the most active reply here. And the reason I don't like Queen b3 is because of knight c6. And this is a move that is trying to make a fool of the queen. Because now if we continue by taking on b7, knight to b4, looks extremely dangerous. I wouldn't be surprised if white's in a lot of trouble here with dual threats of the knight coming in, and in some situations the queen getting trapped. Maybe, for example, let's say knight a3 to defend knight c2. Now something along the lines of a6 and rook b8, but it just feels very risky, this position for white. I don't trust it, and the computer confirms that. So I think this is maybe Colin's first mistake, and this is a very common mistake for lower rated players, playing too passively. In my experience of teaching over 25 years, or 20 years, not 25 years, that'd be a bit too much, over 20 years, people around the 1800 strength and below, they tend to play much too passively. If you get a chance to go active, even if you had to sack a pawn, take it. It's the way to improve. Queen c8, a typical mistake. So now the game continues. Knight c3, c6, white develops his pieces, knight to f3, bishop to e7. Maybe knight to h4 is an interesting move here, trying to gain the bishop pair, because when you're looking at making exchanges in chess, always consider the piece you're trying to exchange. If you see an option, is that piece, so here is the bishop, better than your knight? And the clear answer to that is yes. This bishop is actually quite annoying for white. It's open. It's on the other side of the pyramid. So it's a good bishop, like our bishop here. And for these reasons, I'd be very tempted to swap it off. I'd be very tempted to go knight h4 and just to try to chase that bishop down. Bishop g4, chase that bishop down and take it off, and get a position like this. This is what I do. So whenever you see an exchange, is their piece better than yours? If yes, exchange it. Instead, h3, I like this move also. Knight b d7. And now white plays a very aggressive move. This is all fine play from white so far. Knight to e5. Castle's kingside. Colin playing very sensible moves. And now g4. Now, g4 is okay. But the problem that I think Adam has here, and this is a big error I've noticed in Adam's play, which we're going to see, is that he swaps plans. He goes to one plan, and then he swaps plans. Now, again, a typical mistake shown, and I'm sure a lot of you guys get that as well. Really, if you see a plan in chess, and this is not a one-move plan. One-move plans are rubbish. Stop thinking in one-move plans. You need to think in concepts. So when I mean a plan like, right, where am I going to put my king? Okay, if I'm going g4, already I'm a bit more scared about castling kingside because my king is going to be more exposed. I don't have a pawn on g2 defending later on, as we're going to see. This is a big factor. Moving pawns in front of your king, very risky. So if I'm playing a move like g4, where am I going to put my king? Now, if I'm going to go queenside, fair enough, let's go crazy. But if I'm going to go kingside, I certainly need to put my bishop on f1 on g2. I think this is correct because I need to protect my king. So g4 is okay as long as the idea has some sense. So you're trying, let's say, as long as you're trying to swap off the bishop and put your bishop here and castle kingside, or go queenside and go crazy and go for a crazy attack. So when you play a move that's very committal in chess, you need to have a long-term plan for where your pieces are going to go, where your king is going to go. And of course, one of the most important plans in chess is where your king is going to go. And we're going to see that Adam, it seems to me, doesn't play the right line here. Bishop g6, knight takes g6. So far, fine play. Now a very interesting choice by black. H takes is the standard way of playing, and this is one position where Colin plays the riskier move. So, this is good. Well done, Colin, for finding F takes G6, opening up the F file, and we have a very interesting structure now after F takes G6. Now, again, there are two ways I would play this as white. I'd either castle queenside and try to attack with my pawns later on the king side, pawn storm. Or I would, if I'm going to castle kingside, I really feel my bishop should be on g2, giving my king space. But here we can see that Adam, another thing Adam does, he takes on d5. I don't think this is a mistake, but better players, again, high-rated players, always keep the tension for as long as possible. It's just something they do because it gives them more options. Why take on d5? Let's say we go bishop g2. Is black really going to take on c4? No, I don't think so, because then he's got rid of a very important pawn, and this e6 pawn is horribly weak. So I think another little typical mistake here is clarifying. I don't know if we're going to fly off somewhere. Another nice error by me. Clarifying, you know what I mean. Making the position simpler when you don't need to be. Keep the tension. You look at any games of the top players. They keep the tension. They don't exchange off. Swapping here kind of gets rid of some options of white. Maybe later on you wanted to go c5, b4, b4, b5. Another advantage that black has here now is that the queen has a better route into the game. So I don't like this. But the next move is really, I think, the main mistake. Here, white either needs to castle queenside and go for it, or he needs to go bishop g2 and castle kingside. I don't like bishop d3 followed by castling kingside. I just think the king's too exposed here. And also, this rook c1 move, which is the computer's first suggestion, I also don't like, because you're never going to castle queenside now. Yes, you're maybe lining up the rook against the queen, but it seems to be a little bit symbolic here. It's a little bit artificial. There's not actually a threat here. And white plays a couple of artificial moves now. And this again shows the danger that lower rated players have. I'm trying not to be offensive at all, but it's just a common thing that when in chess, one move plans just don't work. When you're thinking in concepts, in plans, you need to think longer ahead and more generally. Don't just think of one move threats unless they achieve a particular longer term goal. Rook c1 is okay, but my issue with this is that the white king now really has to castle kingside, and I want my pawn back on g2, and we're going to see this is quite important later on. These are only small things, but still relevant to improving. Now, knight b6 is played. Had white gone a4 here, maybe the plan would have made sense, and this would have been certainly my choice. Always look at your opponent's last move. Is there a threat with that move? No. Can I take advantage of the placement of that square? Yes, a4, a5. Let's try to do a pawn storm over there. Knight b5, an error. Too superficial. There's no real idea to this. Whenever you're creating what looks like a threat, always think of your opponent's best choice. Queen d7, very natural, covering d6. And now the knight comes back White's lost a couple of tempo. Colin now plays extremely well. Bishop d6. And I like this because the bishop on f4 again is a good piece. What we're doing here, is the piece on f4 better than my bishop on e7 where it was? Yes, the bishop on f4 is better. Why? It had a better diagonal. It also was the only piece potentially defending the king when it castles. Therefore, I'm going to swap it off. Good exchange. Knight to e2. And now what piece is not playing? Well, the rook on a8. Let's bring it to a half-open file. 2 rooks on 2 half-open files. Very good play. Castle's kingside. And now what squares do we have for our knights? Because at the moment our knights are not very good. All our other pieces are good. Well, knight to e4, a nice central square for the knight. Queen c2, and now a very, very nice maneuver here, and very good play from black, which is the only black piece which is not doing a great job. The knight on b6 is not really doing anything on that square. And this is the typical idea. When you have a bad piece, you have time. Where do you want to move that knight? So take it off the board. Where would be a good square on the board for that knight? Black finds a very typical idea in this structure. Knight c8. Lovely idea. The knight comes to d6 where it supports its brother and takes up a nice strong central square. White plays rook ce1, and now black just takes and plays knight d6. Very nice play from black. And all of black's pieces are now well positioned, so it's time for him to think of an idea. Now here, white should probably go king g2. In the game he played f3, and again this shows another example of Colin maybe playing the safest move. When your opponent plays a move that attacks a piece, I always look at the moves that go forwards first before retreating. And here, the only square that this knight can go forward to is g3. And to me, this looks like a very good move. The idea is if rook to f2, rook takes f4. And I think this knight to g3 move is the way to go. So knight to g5, a little bit too passive, but white's next move is a little bit too loosening. If white plays king g2 here, he's keeping his king as intact as he can. His next move, and I rarely say this move is a mistake, h4, I don't like, because again, you're loosening your pawn structure. h4 becomes weak, g4 becomes weak. My king is on this area of the board. I don't want to push these pawns until I really have at least a queen over there and maybe even a rook behind it. It just looks a little bit loosening to me. Again, I'm being very critical, but I'm just trying to give my little thoughts on the game. Now black goes knight to e6, and all credit to Adam now. I think Adam now really sort of goes for it, because if Adam plays quietly here, his E and F pawns are going to be big targets. The king is going to be weak, and it's only black who can win. And I like Adam's next move. This is a great play by Adam. When the position is starting to look bad, if passive play will leave you in a bad position, you need to look at extreme ways to change the nature of the position. Bishop takes g6. A very good move from Adam. Pawn takes g6, knight takes, and let's just get to the end of the combination. We get to this position where white is now material up. He has 2 pawns and a rook for the 2 knights. Now, I have a different perspective on this. In most books, people say that the 2 pawns and a rook outweighs the 2 minor pieces. My experience is that in the middle game, a position like this, I normally prefer actually to have the 2 minor pieces to the 2 pawns and the rook. I think they're at least equal, and this position the knights are very good in the centre, so I think black is absolutely fine here. But I think white needed to do this, otherwise it's just worse. So it's a good decision. White's next move, very nice. b3, taking away a square from the knights, and this is the typical thing you need to do when playing against the knights. You need to take away their squares. And at the moment, white's doing this great. All of his pawns, look how many squares they control. They control all of these squares. So none of these squares, all the ones are highlighted, the knights can't move into white's position. He's got great control over the squares. But after queen e7, a typical mistake from Adam. And I think Adam has this great idea. You know, he played this great bishop takes g6 move. But then sometimes is a little bit different to Colin the opposite way. He plays a little bit too aggressively. He's maybe a little bit too flamboyant with his pawn moves. Every pawn move creates a weakness. And G5 here now loses control of these two squares, which that G pawn was controlling. So now black has access with his knights into these two squares. I would have preferred queen to H2, just keeping my pawns intact with a roughly equal position, because the knights cannot get in. So be careful with your pawns in future, Adam. G5, and now the knight comes in. Queen to H2, and a very good move now from Colin, C5. He's trying to open up the position to give his knights more potential. Rook F2, a blunder, there goes a pawn. Pawn to E4, and now the knight has to move. Knight D6, and here this is on pre, so white defends it. And let's have a little think. What would you play here as black now? In the game, black took on E4, which is a very normal move, winning a pawn. But sometimes it's more important to look at your assets and really just try to force things through. And I'm seeing that there's a potential passed pawn on the C file. And I would have really, I think, just try to throw that pawn forward straight away. I wouldn't have want to open up too many lines for my opponent's rook. Instead, I would simply just want to push that pawn to kingdom come. And at some point, I expect white's going to have to give up a rook for that pawn. Get a passed pawn. My knight is very good here. And I think I'll just throw that pawn forwards. The game continued. Pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes. And now we have an exchange of rooks. And this is, again, another example, I think, where Colin doesn't go for the most active move. You know, here, he plays knight to C6. A rather negative move. And again, you've always in chess got to look for the most aggressive move. When you're looking at your candidate moves, always start by looking at an aggressive move. Look at moves at capture, look at moves at check. And here, the obvious move is putting the other knight into the center, taking a pawn, and doing this. So this would be the move that I would spend a lot of time calculating from the black perspective. The only thing I can imagine that Colin was worried about was the check on b8, king h7. And now white can't move the h-pawn because g5 is too weak and the rook is on pre, so rook to f8. And maybe Colin stopped here and thought, oh, I don't like the look of this because he's going to check me and my king has to come out. I would be looking at this a different way if I was black here. I'd be thinking I've won a very important pawn. Is my king actually in real danger? I think this position deserved a lot more calculation on Colin's part, because even if white checks you, your king doesn't look that scary coming out to g6 in most lines, because your pieces control any checks from the queen, but you do have a move here. Now, you could move the king out straight away. I don't think that's a big problem, but let's think what white's plan is generally going to be. Well, I think white's plan is going to be a check and to put the rook on e8. e8 is a critical square. Now, how can you control that square and also attack? Let's think proactive. The white king is so exposed. It's much more exposed than our king because of these weakening pawn moves I've criticised a bit earlier on. So how can we try to get into the position? Well, we want to get our queen in. So by playing a move such as knight d6, this would just kill white's position. And we are going to come in with the combination of our queen and two knights. And I think here white is lost. I mean, let's say he gives a check. King g6, and is not any other checks. White's pieces are not good. Because black's pieces are all in the center, they control so many squares. There's nothing on e8. This check here doesn't help. I just come forwards, and next move my queen's diving in with an attack. So again, this is a little case of playing a little bit too negatively. And after knight c6, white plays very well now. Queen g2, knight d4, black struggling for a plan, queen here, and again, black should take this pawn. Knight c6, and now maybe there's time trouble here. Rook e2, c4. I like this, at least it's a bit more proactive. Takes, knight takes, but here a very good move from white. Well done, Adam. This is one example when Adam uses a pawn to his advantage. h5, this is good. He's already sort of made these pawn moves, and these can now at least try to create some counterplay against the black king. Black moves his knight back, g6. we've trapped the king here, meaning that if we ever get to the back rank now, the black king is in trouble. And you can see how black's lost the advantage. Black's been a bit aimless with the knights. Black didn't take the possibility to take the pawn, and now white is actually equal, I think, around here. And this is, again, a good tip for you guys at home. Even when you've got a very good position, if you don't keep playing the most active moves, your advantage is going to slip away. You have to play with energy in chess. Always look for the most active moves. Even if they're complicated, you have to sometimes take the risk. Now, okay, a bit more dancing. Knight d4, queen c5, queen e7, but now queen f4, and white has played very well to hold this together, and I really like the way Adam's got these pawns here. Black dances with his knights more, and look, white is now the one, in my eyes, who's more threatening to black. b5, and here, I think white's next move a little bit superficial again. The check on c8. This is very tempting, but it's clear to see that knight to d8 is the move that obviously black is going to play against this. And has this queen check actually achieved anything? Remember, the threat is stronger than the execution. You know, keeping the check available is much stronger. And the queen here, you know, may want to come on the f-file at some point. So what I'd be doing is looking at my pieces. How can I improve my pieces? Well, my queen is excellent. I don't want to move that. My king is okay. It hasn't gone anywhere better. But what about my rook? Well, if I go rook to d2, I put my rook on an open file, and now queen to c8 is a real threat. And around here, I'd probably even take, you know, white in this position. I mean, for example, b4 runs into either queen c8 check, maybe black can defend with queen f8, or even just a simple move like rook d5, when our pieces are now very well centralized. We're tying down black's pieces. I take white here. And unfortunately for Adam, he slipped up. He played rook to f5, a similar idea, but the problem with this is his queen is actually misplaced here. He needed his queen more centralized. A good move now from Colling, knight to c6, and we can see now that the white queen, even though it looked active, is out of the game here. Rook to f4 had to be played, and even here, white's okay, but now white blunders with rook f7, a bit too aggressive again, because after the check on e4, now white's king is going to in a lot of danger. King g3, check, and now a good centralizing move here. Black is now defending the knight, so you can bring in the other knight to one of these two squares, and the final mistake was king g4, knight to e5, check. So, I mean, what can everyone learn from this game? Well, the opening I've gone over in some detail. That's actually helped my understanding of the London system a bit there. I won't go for what I tipped there. But some typical mistakes that, you know, non-title players play there. First of all, a little bit too passive play from black. A little bit lazy calculation, even though his positional manoeuvring was absolutely excellent. Adam actually had the other problem there. Adam was playing a little bit too actively and weakening his positioning with these pawn moves without any reason. He's also playing the slightly superficial move, you know, one move ideas rather than long-term ideas. Never play these ideas in chess. Only play one move ideas if they're unstoppable threats. So you've got to make sure your opponent can't stop them. If your opponent has an easy way to stop them, why play it? Assume your opponent's going to play the best move. Or if the one move or two move threats have a bigger goal, a bigger positional goal. And I think that was a very interesting game to analyse there. And there's some very positive things that both those players can take away from that game. So thank you everyone for watching that. And I'll be back with, I think, a long play game and some crazy blitz very soon. Cheers for now. Goodbye.